You've had a very exciting week, I have to say. The story,
high drama on the high
it's been a high drama.
Some of the high seas as well.
Some of the puns you've been
clever.
dropping have been amazing.
I want to get straight into it because it was honestly, it's phenomenal. 157 million euro, the largest.
This is the thing.
History of the state.
Yeah, the scale of what's happened and the seizure, it all started with that small fishing boat. That's where it all sort of kicked off. But what has since transpired, and we'll go through all the details of it, has been by a significant margin the biggest drug seizure in the history of the state. And more than 2 tons of cocaine has been ripped out of this giant cargo ship, which is currently sitting in the port of Cork, worth a minimum of 157 million euros. But because some people were comparing it to Dunlock Bay, I think, was the biggest one before that. That was in County Cork, and that was worth something like 400 million in the round. So they're wondering, well, how is this bigger? Well, 157 million is your starting point. Once this is taken by the multiple organised crime gangs who will be involved in distributing this throughout Europe,
and you cut it and you charge a premium for buying,
and everyone gets their markup or whatever.
Some people are estimating this could be worth 700 million euros, 800 million euros. By the time it actually gets around to the streets of Europe, the 157 million euros is actually going to look like small change in comparison to it.
So
huge.
People will probably know then at this stage, so there was the raid by the Air Corps and the Army Rangers of this vessel, the MV Matthew,
I think we've
on
pictures. We can
Tuesday.
So this is we rarely get anything this this clear and this dramatic in terms of what actually happens from the Air Corps, from the Army Ranger Wing, or from the Gardaí in general. So this is what was happening. This is the dropping of the Army Ranger Wing on fast ropes. The first time this has ever happened, by the way, in a live situation of the elite of the Defence Forces onto the deck, because the crew of this ship, 25-member crew of this shipping vessel, which is originally flagged from Panama. It's had a complicated history, though, in terms of naming and ownership as well.
Okay.
But it was seized effectively on the seas by the Irish Army Ranger Wing after it failed to comply with directions to stop. Warning shots were fired by the Irish Navy to try and stop it. They tried to flee. Army Ranger Wing were dropped on board, and then since it was taken into Cork, they found the mother lode on the mothership.
So this all kicked off news-wise then with that original trawler that sort of got into bother off Wexford on Monday night. I think it's Monday night. It felt like such a long week already. I think it was
on Monday night.
Monday evening, Monday night.
I was in Dalymount Park when it was all kicking off.
So the understanding now is obviously that it was carrying drugs that had been sourced from this bigger vessel.
No. The
okay.
timeline, the exact details are a little bit murky for operational reasons. But it is suspected, and well, it's effectively the working theory on it is that one of that fishing boat, which ran aground off Blackwater in County Wexford after it was bought by 2 lads in West Cork who didn't look like they had much sailing experience and later proved by crashing it on a very noticeable sandbank off County Wexford, is that would have been one of the sort of the, like if the big ship is the mothership, you have a number of, this is how it works in terms of distributing cocaine in Europe, is that you have a big ship and you have a lot of smaller boats which will come and take little loads off to various points, whether that be the UK, whether that be to Ireland, France, Spain. That's why
because you can't bring a big container ship in under cover of darkness. People will notice that you're there.
Pretty noticeable, if you tried to sail one of these down the Liffey, do you know what I mean? So effectively, that's what the working theory was either that this had its supply taken off the mothership, or it was on its way to do that when things got a little bit complicated.
So would they have known that this mothership was doing the rounds, but for the first one running aground, or was it already on their radar, almost literally?
Apparently, this operation had been planning for weeks and weeks and weeks. That there was a long build up to this, and there would have been a lot of cooperation from like the US, DEA. Some people might have heard of them, the National Crime Agency in the UK, plus the overall European Union sort of side of things. But there was a lot of intelligence that went into this. I think it's going to be interesting to see how it all plays out in the round as to what piece of the story went before the other, because it is still quite hazy. And it was actually when we were chatting about this on, I think it was on Tuesday morning, and it was the focus was still purely on the little trawler.
Yes,
we were all kind of like, this
are there
is all
drugs
very
on that
strange.
Trawler? How come they haven't found drugs on the trawler? Have the drugs been dumped overboard?
It would be difficult to prosecute had they not found drugs on the trawler.
That's the thing, but because there was word started to leak out, as does happen, is that security sources will start to, when they think they're onto something big, they'll start texting people and they'll be like, here, look, we think we have potentially one of the biggest drug seizures in the history of the state. And when the focus was just on the little trawler, from which no bales of cocaine had been found, there's a little bit of something doesn't really add up to this story. Particularly because nobody saw anything floating out of it. Nobody had actually accessed the trawler, and still hasn't as of this point. Probably won't for a number of days, because It might well end up at the bottom of the Irish Sea because it's in a very bad state and it's broken up at this point. And nobody has been able to, given the conditions of Storm Agnes, been able to actually land on the boat from the air because you couldn't actually sail out to it because it's on a sandbank.
Yeah.
So yeah, nobody's actually looked inside there yet as of this point. On Thursday by the time this goes out. So yeah.
And I know, so there was talk then that some of the crew members on the ship in Cork, that one of them had been medically evacuated the day before. How relevant do you think that might have been in terms of, you know, just gathering intelligence?
This is just one of the, like, there's so many elements to this which are just so wild and just outlandish in terms of...
It is a wild story.
This is mad. We don't get many of these.
No.
This is next level narcos stuff. Like, in terms of the overall scale, the amount of drugs, more than 2 tons, 2,253 kilograms of cocaine found here. The fact that the Irish Army Ranger Wing were descending from fast ropes, warning shots fired on. None of this ever happens.
No.
None of this ever happened.
But I see that the only time they've only ever like discharged weapons or fired shots basically in other waters or other countries. They've actually never done it within Irish territorial waters, or the Rangers have never done it on Irish soil.
And if it wasn't for the fact that conditions were so bad, they wouldn't have had to be deployed. They would have tried to board the ship by other ways, but it was the only way to do it is from the air, and the only lads who can do that are the Ranger Wing.
Yeah,
may as well drop down, lads, and get at it. Wow. But the medical evacuation of the guy from the ship on Monday is such a peculiar detail in all of this.
Yeah,
like, it's so weird. They basically radioed the Coast Guard saying there was a bit of an issue here. One of the guys had to be medically evacuated. He was then arrested. So,
and you wouldn't imagine that like cartels would be particularly concerned about the well-being of their staff. So the fact that they called for a medical evacuation is quite interesting.
Engaging with proper civic and national authorities on the ground. You'd think that if your necessity is to try and make sure that things get sort of pulled off, or that you keep as low a profile as possible, that if someone gets a bit sick, you just try and plow on.
Yeah. I think one of the things was one of the working theories which has been floated around inside and security sources is basically that, well, they didn't want anybody to be suspicious. At this point, did they know that the Gardaí and the authorities were onto them? Probably not, until they tried to swing that giant ship around and peg it away from Cork.
But it's wild to think that the Coast Guard would have had to go out and assist in a medical evacuation of somebody from the vessel on Monday, and then on Tuesday possibly the same personnel were involved in basically commandeering the vessel by force and having it escorted to land because it's got the biggest drugs haul we might ever have had in the history of the state.
Yeah, I think the knock-on impact is probably one of the most interesting points on this, because at the centre of this is a South American, a murderous cartel, as they were described in the Garda briefing, who basically, they are the source of it. They ship it across to Europe, and then you have all these mini cartels, which could include notorious ones in our country, are involved then in the distribution of that. Although they are, like, let's be honest, they are probing whether or not there is a Kinahan link to this. But the Gardaí were also quick to say it doesn't necessarily have to be the Kinahans who are involved in this. There are a number of other cartels and drugs groups who could well have done on a small scale, send up a fishing boat or whatever and connect to this.
Well, it seems like a lot of cartels were clubbing together to get this big order in. You know what I mean?
Well,
a lot of them were.
If its street value could be something approaching like €750 million, you'd think that one individual crime group would be stretched to the like maximum extent of its resources. So it's more likely to be a syndicate of them all clubbing together, like all chipping in on the lift.
Yeah.
Which kind of speaks to like the international, element of the, like it's really the word organised in organised crime, isn't it? Like that's how organised this is. It's an international business. The resources are being put in there, and cartels supporting one another to keep, rising tide lifting all boats, not to carry too much of a pun on that. But it's interesting, when we look at the consequences of if those drugs had made it to the street as well, particularly when we talk about, the impact that this has on people's lives destroyed, and, it's, within certain communities, the drugs are being brought in and sold, and we take it really back to sort of basic level when we look at children who are being groomed into a life of crime and who are being brought in to maybe sell and distribute these drugs. You know what I mean? And we talk about kids as young as 11, 12 and 13 being brought into this life because of big boat deliveries like this, if we're honest.
And it is, and it's so interesting. This is a rare opportunity to sort of lift the lid on how this actually happens, because for every one of these, and it's so rare, i.e. why we're talking about this now today, that we actually stop one of these from happening. The amount of these that actually do get through the net must be quite significant. Otherwise, because we have a voracious appetite for cocaine in this country, clearly, and so does Europe. And I think we're one of the top consumers of cocaine.
We are actually, the latest report was saying that we're one of the highest consumers of cocaine in Europe.
Which I think that will be interesting, because one of the reasons
it's the number one drug in Ireland now.
One of the reasons why it is because it is perceived as being relatively affordable. So an interesting thing to diagnose now will be how much of a supply impact is there if this vessel was ultimately bringing like a massive chunk of cocaine that was going to be consumed in the Irish market. Will that mean that cocaine is materially harder to come by? And if so, will people have
cocaine's going to get more expensive for people?
The price of the brick is going up.
Right.
Supply and demand, possibly. Like, you never know. So I'd be really fascinated to see when all this comes through the wash, how much less cocaine there is in Ireland as a result of a raid like this, or will people who consume it even notice the difference?
Yeah, I like that is the thing.
It's interesting. I suppose it certainly does put authorities on high alert in terms of, but look, like, I think as well you have to be honest and say that, like, criminal gangs, where there's will, there's way, like, you know what I mean? They'll just look at different channels. I think one of the things that came up today that I thought was interesting, though, as you said, Richard, is the consequences for this. Will there be retaliations? You know, will there be, you know, let's be honest, will there be retaliation killings because, you know, did somebody let the cat out of the bag? Did somebody, you know, like, these are questions that have to be asked, and these are things that, like, law enforcement will be looking at now because, you know, are there people that will need to be protected after the outcome of this? Are there people who will be wanted by these gangs because of this?
Yeah, I suppose we probably won't ever know the answer to that because it is such a source. Maybe it's in South America where you're looking at for this, or where exactly, if there was a leak of information, or whether that's through, you know, the intelligence gathered by, whether it be Irish authorities or ones across Europe and the United States and Britain as well. Like, they got the information from somewhere. I don't think we're ever going to find out exactly how they came across that information, but it's going to be one to watch what the ramifications are. We may not have had every arrest in this country that we will see out of this, but this is a huge moment in terms of the battle against organised crime in this country.